Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Insomniac Files, where reality and the dream world collide in a haze of mystery and suspense. Each night, we embark on a journey through the darkest corners of the subconscious, and tonight's tale is no exception. Prepare yourself for an adventure that will blur the line between sleep and waking, where nightmares manifest and secrets from the deepest recesses of your mind emerge. As we walk this path, know this: in the world of dreams, nothing is ever truly as it seems. It was a cold winter evening when Detective Hauser was called to the scene of a peculiar case. A young woman, 28-year-old Rachel Simmons, had been found collapsed in her apartment, unconscious but alive. The doctors at the local hospital couldn't explain her condition. She had no prior health issues, yet she seemed to be suffering from a strange, unexplained fever. No one had any idea what was causing it. The police had quickly ruled out foul play, but there was something about the case that didn't sit right with Hauser. The lack of clear symptoms, the suddenness of the illness, it all felt like there was something more lurking beneath the surface. He called in his trusted medical advisor, Dr. Herlock Gnomes. The brilliant but eccentric neurologist had solved numerous medical mysteries before, and Hauser knew he needed Gnomes' unique expertise to crack this one. When Gnomes arrived at the hospital, his coat fluttered behind him like a cape, his usually wild hair sticking out at odd angles. He moved quickly, his eyes scanning the hospital ward as if searching for an answer in the very air. "Tell me, Hauser," Gnomes said, his voice full of quiet excitement. "What's the situation? Why am I here?" Hauser gestured toward Rachel Simmons' bed, where she lay motionless. "The doctors can't figure it out. Fever, unconsciousness, but no clear cause. Her vitals are all over the place, but there's nothing in her history that suggests this is anything more than a freak occurrence. It's like her body is shutting down for no reason." Gnomes approached the bed, his eyes narrowing as he studied Rachel's condition. He placed a hand on her wrist, checking her pulse. Then he leaned in closer, inspecting her pupils, her breathing patterns. "A fever," he murmured, his voice thoughtful. "But not just any fever. This is neurological in nature. Her brain is under stress. Her body is reacting, but the question is, why?" Hauser stood back, watching Gnomes' methodical approach. "You have any ideas?" Gnomes didn't answer immediately. He turned to the nearest nurse. What was her initial condition when she was brought in? Did she show any signs of trauma or infection? The nurse shook her head. Nothing that stood out. She was perfectly fine that morning, and then she collapsed at work. No injuries, no obvious illness. Gnomes paced around the room. Very interesting. It seems we're dealing with something that's not just physical but psychological too. This is no ordinary fever. Hauser, I believe we need to look at the brain, specifically, how it's interpreting signals. There could be an underlying condition, one that's not immediately apparent." Hauser frowned. But why would something like that appear out of nowhere? Gnomes turned to face him, his eyes gleaming with sudden insight. What if this isn't an illness at all? What if it's an induced condition? A response to something external, a trigger, perhaps. Hauser and Gnomes spent hours investigating Rachel Simmons' case, speaking with family, friends, and coworkers. They learned little that stood out at first. Rachel had no enemies, no history of mental health issues, and no known triggers for illness. Everything pointed to the fact that Rachel was an otherwise healthy, vibrant young woman. But then, Hauser received an anonymous tip. Someone had seen Rachel acting strangely just days before her collapse. A colleague at the office reported seeing her stare blankly at her computer screen, her hands shaking as she typed. At first, her coworkers had assumed it was stress. But now, in light of the situation, Hauser was starting to wonder if it was something more. Maybe someone was poisoning her, Hauser suggested. Could something like that be at play? Gnomes looked thoughtful, his finger tapping his chin as he considered the possibility. Poisoning? It's certainly a possibility. But what kind of poison could cause these specific neurological symptoms without showing immediate signs in her blood? Something subtle, something that would leave no trace. Hauser's mind raced, running through various possibilities. It would have to be something that affects the brain directly. Something that could trigger her body to shut down in phases. A slow-acting neurotoxin? Gnome smiled, a glint of excitement in his eyes. Exactly. But there's one thing we must consider first. The symptoms we're seeing could be indicative of a psychological trigger. Something in Rachel's life, something she encountered, could have set off this cascade of physical responses. Hauser frowned. What do you mean? You think she did this to herself? No, Gnome said, waving his hand dismissively. What I mean is that she might have experienced something so stressful, so mentally overwhelming, that it triggered a physical response in her body. The mind and body are far more connected than we give them credit for. But what could that trigger be? Hauser's thoughts drifted back to the anonymous tip. It could be something from her work. Maybe she saw or heard something she wasn't supposed to. Or maybe someone at the office has a motive. Gnomes gave him a knowing look. That's a possibility. But we're going to need more than a hunch to crack this case. As Hauser and Gnomes continued their investigation, they finally stumbled upon something that changed everything. A cryptic message hidden in one of Rachel's personal notebooks. The message seemed innocuous at first, just a random string of numbers and letters. But when Gnomes carefully analyzed it, he realized it was a code that pointed to a specific location in the city. This, Gnomes said, his voice filled with realization. This is the trigger. Rachel found something. She was trying to decode something important. Hauser leaned in closer. What does it mean? Gnome's fingers flew across his phone, pulling up a map of the city. This location is significant. It's an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. But look here. He pointed to a second part of the message. It's connected to something even deeper. Someone has been manipulating her. Hauser's mind raced as he put the pieces together. So she discovered something she wasn't supposed to. Something dangerous. Exactly, Gnome said, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of discovery. Now we know what happened. Rachel wasn't just a victim of illness, she was a victim of a conspiracy. Someone poisoned her mind, and now, we need to find out who's behind it. Hauser's heart pounded. We're going to that warehouse. Gnomes nodded. And we're going to bring this whole operation down. Hauser and Gnomes arrived at the warehouse just after sundown. The building loomed ahead, its shadows stretching across the cracked asphalt like a giant's hand reaching for them. The area was eerily quiet, the air heavy with the scent of rust and decay. There were no lights, no sounds, nothing but the faint hum of electricity from a distant power line. Hauser adjusted the grip on his gun as they approached the entrance, which was barely hanging on its hinges. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving the structure bare and exposed. Stay sharp, Hauser said, his voice low and commanding. We don't know what we're walking into. Gnomes, for his part, seemed unfazed. His eyes darted around, scanning every detail of the building. This place has been abandoned for years. But there's something about it that feels deliberate. Hauser gave him a puzzled look. What do you mean? Something feels out of place, Gnomes murmured, his hand brushing over the faded symbols etched into the door frame. These aren't just signs of abandonment. They're marks, deliberate, almost as if someone wanted to make sure this place stayed hidden. Hauser nodded grimly. Let's find out who. They moved silently through the doorway, stepping into a long, dimly lit corridor. The floor creaked beneath their feet, each step echoing through the empty halls. The air was thick with dust, and the only light came from a single flickering bulb hanging overhead. This place gives me the creeps, Hauser whispered, his senses heightened. Just wait, Gnomes replied, his voice quiet but steady. We haven't seen the worst of it yet. They continued forward, their footsteps slow and calculated. After what felt like an eternity, they arrived at a large room at the center of the building. Inside there were rows of desks, empty monitors, and medical equipment scattered around, looking like it had been abandoned in a hurry. But what caught Hauser's attention was a large steel door at the far end of the room. That's where we need to go, Gnome said, his voice suddenly serious. They approached the door, and Gnomes inspected the lock. It's sealed, he said with a frown. But it's not impossible to get through. Hauser reached for his gun, prepared for anything. Let's move. With a few precise movements, Gnomes worked his way through the lock, his hands moving with practiced ease. After a few seconds, the lock clicked open, and the door swung wide. Inside, they were met with a scene that made Hauser's stomach churn. The room was a high-tech lab, far beyond what they had expected. Rows of medical equipment lined the walls, each machine flashing with readouts, some of which Hauser could barely comprehend. In the center of the room stood a large tank, similar to the one they had seen at the compound, a containment unit, but this one was different. Inside it floated several human figures, their bodies suspended in a translucent liquid. What the hell is this? Hauser asked, his voice filled with disgust. Gnome stepped closer, studying the tank. This is it. This is where they've been testing the neural manipulation. They've been using these people as subjects, altering their memories, rewriting their personalities. Hauser felt a cold shiver run down his spine. But why? Why would they do this? Gnomes leaned in closer, his eyes scanning the data displayed on a nearby monitor. Because they can, Hauser. Because they have the technology. And because, for some people, control is worth any price. Hauser looked at the figures inside the tank. They looked so lifeless, so unnatural. These people, they don't even know who they are, do they? No, Gnomes replied quietly. They've been reduced to mere vessels, empty shells, their memories erased and replaced with false ones. Hauser clenched his fists. Darden, he's responsible for this. We need to stop him. Gnomes nodded, his face grim. We will. But first, we need to find out who else is involved in this operation. As Gnomes sifted through the medical data on the monitors, Hauser moved around the lab, inspecting everything in sight. There were files, photographs, and medical records scattered across the desks. One file, in particular, caught his eye, a dossier with the name, Project Phoenix, emblazoned on the cover. Gnomes, take a look at this, Hauser said, holding up the file. Gnomes stepped over, his brow furrowing as he skimmed through the documents. Project Phoenix. This is the code name for the neural manipulation experiments. But wait, this is strange. What is it? Hauser asked. Gnomes flipped through the pages, his expression growing more intense. This doesn't make sense. There's a list of names here, patients, subjects. But one of them stands out. Rachel Simmons. Hauser froze. Rachel? But she's the one who collapsed. I know, Gnomes said, his voice tight. She was part of their experiment. Somehow, she got involved, and now she's a casualty in their game. Hauser slammed his fist on the desk, frustration boiling over. This is too much. We have to get to Darden now. Gnomes sighed deeply. We will, Hauser. But we need to plan this carefully. Darden's operation is bigger than we thought, and we can't just barge in without knowing what we're up against. Hauser stared at the screen, a sense of dread creeping up on him. Then what's our next move? Gnomes tapped a few keys on the computer, bringing up a map of the facility. We go straight to the source. Darden's office is located in the next building over. It's heavily guarded, but if we disable the security systems, we can get in. Hauser nodded, determination in his eyes. Let's do it. With the plan set, Hauser and Gnomes moved swiftly through the facility, heading toward the building that housed Darden's office. The halls were eerily silent as they navigated through the complex, avoiding security cameras and guards with practiced ease. As they reached the outer doors of the office building, Gnomes pulled out a small device and began working on the security panel. We have 5 minutes, he said, his voice barely audible. Once we disable the alarm, we'll have access. Hauser kept a sharp lookout, his mind focused on the task at hand. We don't have much time, Gnomes. I know, Gnomes muttered. We'll make it. Just stay alert. The lock clicked, and the door swung open silently. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt thick, heavy with tension. They were close now, closer than ever before to uncovering Darden's secret. The door clicked open, revealing a sleek, modern office. The walls were lined with polished wood, and the shelves were stacked with expensive-looking books and medical journals. At the far end of the room, behind a massive desk, sat Victor Darden, his fingers steepled in front of him. His cold gaze met Hauser and Gnomes as they stepped inside. You finally made it, Darden said, his voice smooth and mocking. I knew you'd come. Everyone always comes eventually. Hauser's hand instinctively went to his gun, but Gnomes held him back with a quick gesture. We don't need to resort to violence yet, Hauser, Gnomes whispered. Let's see what he has to say. Darden smiled, clearly amused by Gnomes' attempt to keep things civil. You think you're in control here? You think you can stop what's coming? You're already too late. Tell us what you've been doing, Darden, Hauser said, his voice steady but filled with anger. We know about the experiments. We know about the manipulation, the altered memories. Darden's smile widened. You really don't understand, do you? This isn't just about power. It's about evolution. The human mind is capable of so much more than you realize. And now, thanks to Neurotox 7, we're on the brink of something magnificent. Gnome's eyes narrowed. You're using people as experiments, altering their memories, manipulating their thoughts, and you call that evolution? Darden leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. Call it what you want. But in the end, it's the next step in human development. The mind is malleable. We've only just begun to tap into its true potential. Imagine a world where people could be shaped, their memories rewritten to suit any need, any purpose. A world without crime, without conflict. A world controlled. Hauser's hands tightened into fists. That's not evolution, that's tyranny. You're playing God with people's lives. Darden's eyes glinted with cold amusement. You think I'm the only one who sees the potential here? The people in power understand. They see what I'm building. And when it's finished, nothing will be the same. You're just one more obstacle in the way. Gnome stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. We're here to stop you, Darden. You're not getting away with this. Darden chuckled softly. We'll see about that. But first, you'll have to deal with what's coming next. As Darden spoke, the room suddenly erupted in chaos. The lights flickered, and the sound of alarms filled the air. Hauser's heart raced as he looked around, trying to pinpoint the source of the disturbance. What's happening? Hauser demanded. Gnome's expression darkened. He's activated the security system. We've triggered something. Darden's face twisted into a satisfied smirk as he stood up from his chair. It's too late now, Hauser. The facility is on lockdown. No one leaves. A deep rumble shook the building, followed by the sound of doors slamming shut, one after another. Hauser quickly scanned the room for an exit but found none. The walls seemed to close in around them, the alarms growing louder. Damn it! Hauser swore. We've been set up. Gnomes didn't react. Instead, he pulled out a small device from his coat pocket and began typing rapidly. I can override the system. Just give me a moment. Hauser stayed on alert, his hands still on his gun. He could hear footsteps approaching from outside the office. They were running out of time. Keep moving, Hauser urged, his voice tight. We can't afford to stay here. Just as the footsteps reached the door, Gnomes hit a final key on his device. The alarm stopped, and the lockdown sequence was interrupted. We're in, Gnomes said, breathing a sigh of relief. But we need to move fast. They'll know we've compromised the system. Hauser nodded and bolted toward the door, Gnomes close behind. We're not out of this yet. Hauser and Gnomes raced through the halls of the facility, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. They could hear the sound of distant voices and the heavy thud of boots as security guards scrambled to contain the breach. This way! Gnomes shouted, leading Hauser down a narrow corridor. The exit is on the other side of the building. If we can reach it, we might have a chance to escape. Hauser kept pace with him, glancing over his shoulder as they ran. What about Darden? What's he planning next? We need to focus on getting out of here, Gnomes replied, his voice low. Darden will do whatever it takes to cover his tracks. But if we get the data, we can expose him. We just need to get it to the right people. Hauser nodded, determination etched on his face. Then let's finish this. As they turned the corner, they came face to face with a group of armed guards, blocking their path. Hauser's heart skipped a beat as he saw the weapons in their hands. Damn it! Hauser cursed. We've got company! Get down! Gnomes yelled, pushing Hauser to the ground as bullets rang out. The hallway erupted in gunfire, the walls ricocheting with the sound of bullets. Hauser and Gnomes scrambled to cover, ducking behind a large metal container. We can't stay here! Hauser shouted, peeking around the corner. We need to find another way out. Gnomes scanned the area, his mind working at lightning speed. I've got an idea, he said. Follow me. The escape route Gnomes led Hauser to was a small maintenance tunnel hidden behind a heavy door. They moved quickly, squeezing through the narrow opening and disappearing into the darkness. Once inside the tunnel, Hauser felt a wave of relief wash over him. But they were far from safe. The tunnel led to a maintenance room, but there was still the matter of Darden and his forces to contend with. We're not out of the woods yet, Hauser said, his voice filled with urgency. We need to take down Darden before he can do any more damage. Gnomes nodded, his expression grim. I agree. But we need to outsmart him, Hauser. We have to hit him where it hurts. Hauser's eyes burned with determination. Then let's bring him down. They stepped into the maintenance room, where Hauser quickly scanned the area for any sign of Darden or his team. Gnomes began to work on the control panel, preparing to disable the facility's final defenses. We don't have much time, Gnomes warned. Darden won't give up easily. Hauser nodded, his hands still gripping his weapon. I'm ready. Let's finish this. Hauser and Gnomes moved swiftly through the maintenance tunnel, the sound of their footsteps echoing against the cold concrete walls. They had barely made it past the security forces and their traps, but the feeling of being hunted never left them. The air around them grew thicker with tension as they neared the exit. We're almost there, Gnomes said, his voice barely a whisper. Once we reach the control room, we can shut down Darden's operation for good. Hauser nodded, his gun tightly gripped in his hand. But we need to be careful. Darden is still in control of the facility. He's not going to let us just walk out of here. As they neared the final door, Gnomes froze. His eyes darted around, scanning the area. Wait. Something's wrong. Hauser glanced at him. What is it? The exit's been rigged, Gnomes said, his voice tight. It's a trap. Before Hauser could respond, the entire facility seemed to come alive. The walls hummed with energy, the overhead lights flickered, and a distant alarm blared. Hauser's heart raced as he realized what had happened. Darden had anticipated their every move. I knew it, Hauser muttered, his pulse quickening. We're walking right into his hands. Gnome's face was grim as he scanned the corridor ahead. We need to disable the security system before it locks us in here. The longer we stay, the harder it will be to get out. Hauser stepped forward, determined. Then let's do it. Gnomes quickly moved toward a nearby control panel, his fingers flying over the buttons. Hauser kept watch, his eyes darting from one end of the hall to the other. The seconds stretched on, each one feeling heavier than the last. What's taking so long? Hauser demanded, his voice filled with urgency. I'm bypassing the security encryption, Gnomes replied, his tone calm but focused. We don't have much time. Once the lockdown is initiated, the doors will be sealed for good. Hauser's grip on his gun tightened as he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, loud and fast, approaching from the far end of the hall. They're coming, Hauser said. We need to move. Gnomes didn't look up from the control panel. Almost there. Just give me a few more seconds. Hauser's eyes flicked to the doorway, anxiety rising in his chest. They were running out of time. Suddenly, Gnome's fingers paused over the control panel. Got it. We're in. The doors ahead of them clicked open, and Hauser wasted no time in pushing forward. They moved quickly through the hallways, weaving between doors and corridors as they navigated their way toward Darden's central office. Keep up! Hauser barked, his heart racing. We're almost there! The air grew colder as they approached the final door, Darden's office. Hauser's mind raced, the weight of their mission pressing down on him. They had come this far. There was no turning back. We need to be careful, Gnomes warned, his voice low. Darden knows we're coming. He's not going to let us just waltz in. Hauser nodded, his hand steady on the handle of his gun. We've got no choice. We end this now. He pushed the door open, and the moment they stepped inside, they were greeted by the sight of Darden, standing in front of his desk, a calm smile playing at the corners of his lips. Detective Hauser, Dr. Gnomes, Darden said, his voice smooth and condescending. I've been expecting you. You're a bit late, but no matter. You're here, and now we can end this. Hauser's eyes narrowed. This ends now, Darden. We know what you've been doing. Darden's smirk widened. You think you've uncovered the truth? You're so far behind, it's almost laughable. Gnomes stepped forward, his voice steady. We know about the experiments. We know about the manipulation, the memory alteration, and the control you've been exerting over people. You're not getting away with this. Darden's expression darkened. You've barely scratched the surface, Gnomes. You think you've won? I've already won. The future is mine, and you're too late to stop it. Hauser stood still, his eyes locked onto Darden's. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he knew that they were nearing the end. There was one final piece to this puzzle. One last question. What's the real plan, Darden? Hauser asked, his voice steady but filled with determination. What's your endgame? Darden's eyes glinted with a mix of pride and madness. You still don't get it, do you? This isn't just about power. It's about control, yes, but it's also about changing the very fabric of humanity. With Neurotox 7, I can rewrite history itself. I can create a perfect world, a world where memories are no longer our burden. Where people can be reprogrammed, remade. Hauser felt a chill run down his spine. You're playing God. I am reshaping humanity, Darden said, his tone dark and triumphant. And no one is going to stop me. Gnome stepped forward, his voice filled with quiet intensity. You don't understand, Darden. You're not creating a perfect world. You're creating a nightmare. A world where no one is truly themselves. A world of empty shells. Darden's expression faltered for a split second, but it quickly returned to his usual cold, calculating demeanor. You've lost, Gnomes. You can't stop it. Gnomes looked at Hauser, his eyes filled with quiet determination. We can stop it, Hauser. But we need to act quickly. Hauser's fingers tightened around his gun. It's time to end this. With a sudden movement, Hauser lunged forward, taking advantage of Darden's momentary distraction. In the blink of an eye, he had Darden pinned to the ground, the gun aimed directly at his head. Gnomes moved quickly, accessing the central system and disabling the main controls. The monitors flickered as Darden's operation was shut down. The room shook as the facility's systems began to collapse, the connection to the neural manipulation network severed. No! Darden shouted, his voice filled with fury. You can't stop this! Hauser looked down at him, his expression grim. We already have. With one last look at Darden, Hauser pulled the trigger, ending the threat once and for all. The silence that followed Darden's fall was suffocating. Hauser stood over him, breathing heavily, still feeling the adrenaline coursing through his veins. His gun was still pointed at Darden, but the man on the floor no longer posed a threat. Hauser's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the wreckage of what had once been a high-tech operation. The monitors were flickering, the screens that had once displayed data now showing only static. We did it, Hauser said, his voice hollow, though his words rang with a sense of finality. It's over. Gnomes, still working at the terminal, paused and looked up. It's over, Hauser. But it's not the end of the story. There's more we need to uncover. Darden may have been the face, but there are others pulling the strings. Hauser shook his head, a wave of exhaustion crashing over him. At this point, Gnomes, I just want to go home. Gnomes, however, was already lost in his thoughts. There are still questions about the people Darden worked with, the higher-ups who funded these experiments, and most importantly, the survivors of these projects. The ones who had their memories erased, their identities rewritten. We can't leave them to suffer. Hauser stood still for a moment, processing Gnome's words. We'll find them. We'll expose the whole damn thing. Gnomes gave him a small smile, his gaze unwavering. That's the plan. Back at the police station, Hauser sat in front of a large bulletin board, the remains of his investigation scattered around him: photographs, witness statements, files from the medical team, and the digital evidence they had gathered from Darden's facility. His mind was spinning as he tried to connect the dots, but it was clear that this wasn't just the work of one man. The deeper he looked, the more it seemed like Darden was just a small cog in a much larger machine. "We need to go after the source," Hauser muttered under his breath. Gnomes, who had been scanning through medical reports, looked up. "The source?" "Yeah," Hauser replied. "Darden had funding, connections, and resources. He didn't work alone. He was backed by someone bigger. We need to find out who." Gnomes nodded thoughtfully. "I agree. But the more we dig, the more we uncover. We're getting close to something much darker." Hauser ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Every time we take one step forward, it feels like we're falling 2 steps back. I just want this to end, Gnomes." Gnome's voice softened. "I know, Hauser. But the truth is out there. We just need to keep digging." The investigation took them across several cities, from corporate offices to shady back alley deals. With each new lead, Hauser and Gnomes unraveled a bit more of the hidden network that had been financing Darden's twisted experiments. As they dug deeper, it became clear that these weren't just corporate interests, they were global. Powerful figures in politics, law enforcement, and even the military were implicated. "We're in over our heads now, aren't we?" Hauser asked, as they made their way to yet another secure location. "We've been over our heads for a while," Gnomes replied dryly. "But the truth must come to light." Hauser sighed and looked out the window, his thoughts swirling. "We're dealing with more than just a conspiracy. This is about control. Human lives being manipulated like lab rats. And the worst part is that people are still living in the dark, unaware of the monsters controlling them." Gnomes was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowing. "People like Rachel Simmons. She wasn't just a victim, she was a warning. Darden's experiments, he wasn't just rewriting memories, Hauser. He was trying to create an army of loyal subjects, people who could be molded into whatever he needed." Hauser clenched his fists. "And that's where it starts. That's where we need to make a stand." The final piece of the puzzle came when they tracked down a whistleblower, a former employee of Biogentech who had worked directly with Darden. The information he provided was chilling. There was a hidden facility, a place where the most dangerous experiments had been conducted, a place where Darden had gone to hide after his public downfall. "We're getting closer," Hauser said, as they prepared to infiltrate the hidden compound. "But this is the last stop. If we don't stop Darden's operation here, we're done." Gnomes checked his equipment one last time, ensuring everything was in place. "We'll stop him. But we need to be careful. This place is likely heavily guarded." Hauser nodded. "I don't care what it takes. We finish this tonight." They arrived at the hidden facility just after midnight. The compound was well hidden, tucked away in a remote location far from prying eyes. As they approached the entrance, Hauser's mind raced. This was it, the moment they would either succeed or fail. Gnomes silently unlocked a side door using the code they had obtained from the whistleblower. The facility inside was eerily quiet, its cold, metallic interior reflecting the harsh light from their flashlights. "This place is a fortress," Hauser muttered. "But we've come this far. We need to see it through." They moved quickly, bypassing security cameras and silent alarms. Each step took them closer to the heart of the operation. Finally, they reached the central control room, a large space filled with monitors, computers, and rows of glass tanks. Inside the tanks, Hauser could see people suspended in liquid, their bodies motionless. "Are these the victims?" Hauser asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Gnomes nodded, his expression grim. They were the final subjects. Darden wanted to create the perfect soldiers. People whose memories could be rewritten, manipulated. Hauser felt a wave of disgust wash over him. "This is worse than we thought. We need to shut this down, now." Hauser and Gnome stepped cautiously into the central control room, their footsteps muffled by the sterile, industrial flooring. The air was thick with tension as they took in their surroundings, rows of computers, flashing monitors, and the eerie hum of the facility's infrastructure. At the far end of the room, a large, cylindrical tank dominated the space. It contained a figure, motionless, suspended in the same fluid as the others they had seen. But this figure was different. It was larger, its body more defined. And Hauser recognized the face. "That's Rachel," Hauser said, his voice tight. "She's here." Gnomes moved toward the tank, his eyes scanning the readouts on the nearby screen. "She's been here for a while. Her vitals are stable, but she's not conscious." Hauser's heart pounded as he approached the tank. "What did they do to her? Why is she here?" Gnomes, his expression grim, pulled up the data on the screen. Rachel Simmons was part of the final phase of the experiment. They'd been using Neurotox 7 on her, altering her memory, rewriting her identity. But it's not just about control. It's about manipulation. Darden wasn't just trying to make people forget their pasts. He wanted to replace their entire sense of self. Hauser's mind raced as the full weight of their discovery hit him. "This is bigger than we thought. They've created a network of people who don't even know who they are. They're puppets, and Darden's the puppeteer." Gnomes turned to face him, his gaze filled with determination. "And it's not just Rachel. There are more subjects like her, people whose identities have been erased and replaced. We need to shut this operation down before it spreads any further." Hauser nodded, his jaw set. "Then let's finish this." Hauser and Gnomes worked quickly, setting up equipment to sever the connection between Darden's central system and the subjects being controlled by Neurotox 7. The operation was delicate, and time was running out. Every second they spent in the facility brought them closer to danger. "We're running out of time," Gnomes said, his voice tense. "This system is designed to self-destruct if it's tampered with. If we're not careful, we could trigger a lockdown that will seal us inside." Hauser gritted his teeth. "We have no choice. We need to act now before it's too late." Gnomes nodded, his fingers flying over the terminal as he began inputting commands. "This will take a few minutes, but we're almost there. Just stay alert." Hauser kept watch, his eyes darting between the security monitors and the door to the control room. He could hear distant footsteps and the hum of machinery, but no one had appeared yet. The silence felt oppressive, like the calm before the storm. Suddenly, the door slammed open. Hauser instinctively raised his gun, ready for whatever came through. But it wasn't just one person. Darden's voice echoed through the room, his words cold and mocking. "You really think you can stop me, Hauser? You think you can shut down what I've built?" Hauser's grip tightened on the gun. "You're finished, Darden. This is over." Darden stepped forward, his eyes flashing with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. I control everything here. The system. The subjects. The people in power. You can't stop me. You've already lost," Hauser said, his voice unwavering. "The operation is shutting down. It's over." But Darden didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, slowly, almost sadly. You think you've won? There's more to this than you realize. You've only just begun to uncover the truth. You've exposed my experiment, yes. But the real question is, what happens when you take away the control? Hauser's brow furrowed. What are you talking about? Darden stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. When you take away the memories of the subjects, what's left of them? What happens when their identities disappear? They're no longer people, they're just empty shells. And without the memories that make them who they are, they'll be nothing more than puppets, waiting for someone to pull the strings. Hauser felt the weight of Darden's words sink in. This wasn't just about shutting down an operation, it was about the very nature of identity, consciousness, and free will. Darden had created a system that erased people's memories and replaced them with new ones, but what did that mean for the people caught in the middle? Gnomes, still focused on the terminal, turned to Hauser. We have to disconnect the system completely. We can't leave it running. But we also need to make sure we don't destroy the subjects in the process. Hauser's mind raced. So we're playing God too, then? We're deciding who gets to keep their memories and who doesn't? Gnome's voice softened. We're not playing God. We're stopping someone who was. Hauser stared at Rachel's lifeless form in the tank, his thoughts racing. She wasn't just a victim of Darden's operation, she was a victim of a system that had taken away her agency, her identity. How could they undo all the damage that had been done? He shook his head. Let's finish this. Gnomes nodded and typed in the final command, sending a signal through the system. The monitors flickered, and the lights in the room dimmed briefly before coming back to life. The alarm that had been blaring for so long stopped suddenly, replaced by a deafening silence. We did it, Gnomes said quietly, his face weary. The system's gone. But Hauser didn't feel the victory he thought he would. Instead, he felt a deep sense of unease. They had stopped Darden, but there were still so many unanswered questions. So many lives altered beyond repair. With Darden's operation shut down and the system severed, Hauser and Gnomes began the difficult process of releasing the subjects from their tanks. The people inside were unresponsive at first, their bodies still suspended in the fluid. But one by one, they were gently brought back to consciousness, their minds slowly returning to them. Rachel Simmons was the last to wake, her eyes fluttering open as she gasped for air. Hauser stood over her, his heart pounding as he watched her take her first breaths. Rachel, Hauser said softly. Can you hear me? Her eyes blinked, confusion and fear clouding her expression. Where am I? What's happening? It's over, Gnomes said gently. You're safe now. Rachel's gaze flickered between Hauser and Gnomes, her mind slowly trying to make sense of the world around her. I don't remember. Hauser knelt beside her, his voice filled with empathy. You were part of an experiment, Rachel. They erased your memories, rewrote who you were. But we've stopped them. You're free now. Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes. I don't know who I am anymore. Hauser looked at Gnomes, his heart heavy. What happens to her now? Gnomes sighed, his voice quiet. That's the problem, Hauser. The damage has been done. The memories that were erased can't just be put back. It's not as simple as flipping a switch. Hauser looked back at Rachel, her eyes full of uncertainty. We'll help you. We'll find a way. But deep down, Hauser knew that the real work was just beginning. Darden's legacy couldn't be undone in a single moment. The victims of his twisted experiments would need more than just protection. They would need a new identity. A new life. The facility, once a place of horror, now stood silent, its dark secrets locked away in the recesses of memory. Hauser and Gnomes stood amidst the remnants of Darden's twisted empire, watching as the once powerful operation crumbled around them. But even in victory, the weight of the situation lingered heavily on their shoulders. "I can't believe we've made it this far," Hauser said quietly, staring at the now inactive screens that had once displayed Darden's gruesome experiments. "But what happens next?" Gnomes sighed deeply, adjusting his glasses. "The damage is done, Hauser. We've stopped Darden, but his legacy will leave scars. The people who were caught in his web, Rachel and the others, we can't just walk away from them." Hauser nodded. "I know. But we can't fix everything. We'll need help." "Help?" Gnomes echoed. "The damage done by the experiment isn't something that can be reversed in a day. Rachel and the others will need to rebuild their lives from the ground up. It's going to take time, therapy, and support." Hauser clenched his fists, frustration bubbling up inside him. "It's not fair. They were manipulated, used as experiments. They were stripped of everything that made them who they were." Gnomes placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not fair. But we've given them a chance to regain some control. Now it's up to them to take back their lives. But we'll be here to help. We can't give up on them now." Hauser's eyes softened as he turned back to look at Rachel, who sat quietly in the corner, her expression a mix of confusion and fear. Hauser and Gnomes spent the next few weeks working tirelessly with Rachel and the other survivors of Darden's experiments. It wasn't easy, and progress was slow. The emotional toll on the victims was immense. Memories had been erased, replaced with false identities, and it wasn't something that could simply be fixed. Rachel struggled the most. She had no memory of her past, no sense of self, and no way of distinguishing who she truly was. She had flashes, fragments of memories, but they were disjointed and incomplete. Hauser sat with her in a quiet room one afternoon, trying to help her piece together what had been lost. "Rachel," he said softly, his voice gentle, "take your time. No one is rushing you. We're here to help you find yourself again." Rachel looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know where to start," she whispered. "I don't know who I am." "You're more than what they did to you," Hauser said, his voice firm but kind. "You're not defined by the experiments, Rachel. You're your own person. We just need to help you remember that." She nodded slowly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I want to remember. But what if I don't like what I find?" Hauser gave her a reassuring smile. "It's not about liking or disliking what you find. It's about knowing who you are. And you're not alone in this. We'll help you every step of the way." While Hauser and Gnomes worked to help the survivors rebuild, the rest of the world began to learn the truth about Darden's experiments. News outlets reported on the conspiracy, the medical manipulation, and the people whose lives had been forever changed. Hauser and Gnomes were both hailed as heroes, but the true heroes were the victims, the ones who had the strength to fight back and reclaim their identities. But the ripple effect of Darden's actions spread far beyond the immediate aftermath. Hauser received a call one afternoon from an old contact in the FBI, a friend who had been following the case closely. "Hauser," the voice on the other end said, "you won't believe what we've uncovered. Darden wasn't just acting alone. We've traced his operation back to multiple powerful organizations, politicians, corporations, even military contractors." Hauser's stomach dropped. "What do you mean? Darden was working with more than just a few shady associates?" "You have no idea how deep this goes," the voice continued. We've found evidence linking Darden to a global network of people who were involved in mind control experiments, genetic manipulation, and psychological warfare. This wasn't just a mad scientist's project, it was a multi-billion-dollar operation. Hauser ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. So, this wasn't just about creating a few altered individuals. Darden was building something much bigger. Exactly. And now, it's up to us to bring this whole operation down. We need to act fast, Hauser. If we don't, Darden's legacy will continue. Hauser and Gnomes, along with the help of the FBI and other law enforcement agencies, launched a full-scale investigation into the global network that had supported Darden's twisted experiments. They dug deep, tracing money trails, hacking into databases, and following leads that took them across the world. But with each discovery, the stakes grew higher. The people involved in Darden's operation were powerful, and they weren't going to go down without a fight. Hauser and Gnomes found themselves facing off against dangerous adversaries, corporate execs, government officials, and even military operatives, each of whom had a vested interest in keeping the operation a secret. I never imagined this, Hauser said one evening, as he and Gnomes sat in their makeshift office, sorting through the mountain of evidence they had gathered. This is bigger than anything I've ever faced. How do we even begin to take this down? Gnomes leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. We begin by hitting them where it hurts. The money. The power. We take away their foundation, and they'll have nothing left. Hauser's eyes narrowed. But they won't go down easily. They'll fight back with everything they have. They already are, Gnomes said quietly. But we're not alone anymore. We have the truth on our side. The culmination of their efforts came when they managed to track down the highest-ranking official involved in Darden's global operation, a man who had remained in the shadows, pulling the strings behind the scenes. Hauser and Gnomes set up a final confrontation, gathering all the evidence they had amassed and preparing to expose the truth to the world. The meeting place was neutral territory, an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Hauser and Gnomes were ready for anything. As they approached the warehouse, they could feel the weight of the moment. "This is it," Hauser said, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. "We're going to finish this," Gnomes replied, a rare glimmer of confidence in his eyes. Inside, the man they had been tracking, along with his security team, was waiting for them. The confrontation was intense, the tension thick in the air. But in the end, Hauser and Gnomes prevailed. The evidence they had gathered was enough to bring the entire operation crashing down. As the man was arrested, Hauser couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. They had stopped the conspiracy, exposed the people responsible, and, most importantly, given the victims a chance to rebuild their lives. "Is it over?" Hauser asked, his voice soft. Gnomes nodded. "For now. But the fight for justice never truly ends." In the weeks that followed, the world began to heal. The survivors of Darden's experiments started the long process of rebuilding their identities, aided by medical professionals, therapists, and Hauser and Gnomes. Rachel Simmons, though still unsure of herself, found a new sense of purpose, working alongside others who had been affected by the same cruel experiment. Hauser and Gnomes, though hailed as heroes, knew that their work wasn't finished. There would always be more to uncover, more dark corners of the world to expose. But for now, they could rest, knowing they had made a difference. The world had been changed by their actions, and it was up to them to ensure that it never happened again.